I'm here tonight to speak to the PEDC meeting that I attended as a delegate on June 12th. I had no remarks planned for that meeting aside from noting my support because I naively expected that the clear presentation of Ken Kowal and the presence of 5 community delegates would lead to unanimous support for the proposed changes. Instead, I saw racist remarks and white fragility on display in the comments of many councillors who spoke against the expansion of the DEIAC mandate. The initial responses were not openly racist, but they still ranged from a vague and unfounded fear that changing the terms of reference could open up the mandate to anything outside the region, to the inflammatory suggestion that this would be taking an advisory committee and turning it into an activist group. The request is to allow the committee to bring forward and advise council on community DEI issues and to broaden the scope to including external issues. For a councillor to say that the role of regional council is not to create activist groups is problematic because that implies that action would be taken by the DEIAC separate from approvals by regional council. It also ignores the fact that the motion itself was prompted because the DEIAC feels council has not been taking action on its strategic priorities to ensure the region is inclusive, welcoming, and free of discrimination. The region committed fully to DEI work in 2020 by signing on to the Coalition of Inclusive Municipalities, thereby agreeing to establish policies to eradicate all forms of racism and discrimination. The objectives laid out in the CIM declaration feature both internal and external facing responsibilities, as have been alluded to by other delegates. And as Ken mentioned tonight, the Community DEI Experiences Report has shown that racism is an issue in Niagara. Despite this, anti-racist initiatives are not likely to be addressed until 2025. This appears to be due to a combination of understaffing within the region, the complement to the committee, organizational delays, and a complete lack of material provided by council to the DEIAC to provide input or feedback on. And for a councillor to say that approving the expansion of terms of reference would risk bogging down council in issues that far exceed our mandate feels like more of the same language of division we've been hearing from the same councillor. If it's not within the mandate of the region to address issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, and Indigenous reconciliation in the community, then why even list this among the region's guiding principles, let alone first in the list? Why, as Ken himself said in that meeting, even have this committee? But to disband this committee is obviously not the solution. Nearly every councillor who spoke on the motion began by praising the work of the DEIC volunteers. Despite this, only one person spoke in support of the committee's request. And unsurprisingly, this councillor also shared personal experience with discrimination that had motivated them to become involved in regional politics. When the demographics of council members were highlighted by a delegate, specifically that this is largely a group of white people who do not witness or experience racism themselves the way that community members do. Defensiveness of councillors was palpable. Taking offense as an elected official is not productive, especially when the information being shared is that members of your community do not feel safe. When Black and Indigenous people of color, or people under the 2S LGBTQIA community, tell you that you're not seeing daily discrimination the way that they are, your job is to listen to the needs being expressed, not cite your diverse family as reasons why you cannot be contributing to the systemic problems. The same councillor doubled down on the offensiveness of their comments by advising volunteers to stay in their lane, as though they're not doing exactly that by attempting to guide council to take meaningful action on issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion within the community. This individual claims to have understanding of the lived experiences of those facing discrimination due to race, but no one on this committee has shown that sort of empathy. Well, I shouldn't say no one. It's rare for people on this committee to show that empathy to the members of the local Palestinian community who were denied the right to speak in council chambers. And then when these racist remarks were challenged by another councillor, this led to the chair upholding the principles of whiteness by demanding that this language should be carefully monitored. For the chair to have not done so previously when these racist statements were being made was appalling to watch, though unsurprising, since no one called to account another councillor back in May for insisting that we are all Indigenous. It just depends on which group we're with, when attempting to justify their objection to participating in land acknowledgement. Clearly, the issues with discrimination and racism in Niagara include the attitudes and actions of regional councillors themselves. But the issue is not limited to the elected officials here in this chamber. As human beings, we are all inherently racist because we all participate in systems that uphold racism. In the words of Scott Woods, Black author and poet, The problem is that white people see racism as conscious hate, when racism is bigger than that. It's like being born
We
into
have
air.
now reached the 5 minutes, so would you wrap up, please?
Yes, I'll be as quick as I can. Sorry, it's my first time doing this. It's like being born into air. You take it in as soon as you breathe. Anti-racism efforts must therefore be a fundamental part of ensuring the region is inclusive, welcoming, and free of discrimination. And the only way to ensure that this is done effectively is to listen to the voices of those impacted: Black, Indigenous, Palestinian, and the many other multicultural identities within citizens of the region. These groups are crying out for action because signs and strategic priorities are not enough to make communities feel safe. If Council is not going to bring DEI issues to the Advisory Committee, I see no sense in preventing the Advisory Committee from bringing these issues and recommendations to the awareness of Council.
Okay, the time has expired.
I was going to quote you next. If you don't want me to quote you, I won't.
Don't worry about quoting me.
It's just from the DEI action plan, the fact that, in the past 2 years, elected officials have seen at every level we can't ignore the growing need for change.
Members of Council, I'm sorry,
I hope we won't ignore this call. That's my final word. Thank you so much.
Thank you.